Shalom, giving honor and praise unto Yah, the creator and maker of heaven and earth. This is the conclusion. Hebrew presents Black History, Part 5. Now, we read in this book here entitled A History of Western Africa, A History of West Africa by Basil Davidson, and speaks about how the Spanish and the Portuguese were heavily involved in the slave trade. There's other books that speak about that as well. Now, one reference I'd like to go into, if we will, I have a book here entitled The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas. And we are going to go to page 280 and read a part of it. Page 280 in this book here entitled The Slave Trade, A History of the Atlantic Slave Trade, 1440 to 1870 by Hugh Thomas. And on page 280, we see the following. And it says as follows. Then came the concession of a new large-scale asiento in the old style to the Cadiz Slave Company, a society directed by the imaginative and persistent Basque Miguel de Uriarte of Puerto de Santa Maria, supported by the numerous fellow Basque resident in Cadiz. Uriarte wanted a 10-year contract to sell slaves at 300 pesos a pieza wherever he thought desirable. His scheme was traditional in structure. Ships would be sent from Cadiz full of European goods to West Africa, where the goods would be exchanged for slaves. He suggested that neither his ships nor his goods should incur taxes. He proposed taking all his slaves first to Puerto Rico, where they would be distributed to other Caribbean ports, just as Walsh had thought of assembling all his slaves in St. Dominique. Now, that right here, and I wanted to show, it distinctly speaks about the Cadiz Slave Company. Now, we just showed a map in part 4, speaking about how Cadiz and what it said about to the West Indies. So that way we can gain some understanding of what's being spoken about. This is Spain, and they actually had a Cadiz Slave Company. Now, I like to sit there, keeping it there. I like to go to page 327 of the same book, speaking about Cadiz in Spain and the slave trade. All right? And on page 327 of this book entitled The Slave Trade by Hugh Thomas, we read the following. Wine continued to be provided by the Portuguese, and when the Spaniards re-entered the slave trade in the late 18th century, that is to say in the late 1700s, barrels of wine figured largely on the list of the Cadiz Company to be exchanged for slaves in Africa. The slave markets of La Rochelle, Bordeaux, and Nantes also sent wine to Africa as part of their cargoes, La Rochelle being then a great producer and known as the city of Bacchus. Now, one of the things I wanted to sit there and point out, you will read about them sending wine and other things of that sort over to be traded with people in Africa for slaves. Now, we went over, brothers and sisters, and cross-referencing about how the children of Israel scattered into Western Africa, even mentioned by the prophet Zephaniah. Because once you understand where it says beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, you then know and understand emphatically what the book is talking about. It is speaking about Western Africa. Because if you can't go east of the rivers of Ethiopia, because then you'll wind up where the Indian Ocean is. All right, so you by default will have to go west of that in order to get into what we know and understand as Western Africa. So that right there is very, very important to let it be known and understood emphatically what's being spoken about in that aspect. All right, so there won't be no misunderstanding, no confusion, and so forth and so on. Who were the people? Where did the people scatter to? Who was taken over into the slavery, and so forth and so on. All right, so that way we can gain some understanding of what we're speaking about. Brothers and sisters, I don't sit here and claim to know everything. I am open to constructive criticism. Please feel free to do so. However, I do present, some say with a passion, concerning the fact of who the children of Israel are and where the children of Israel scattered. Now, in this particular short version that I have here of African map, I like to sit here and go over a particular situation. This right here is what we will call Ethiopia, if you will. And see the rivers that we're speaking of right here, blue now. And if we look right here, white now. So the rivers of Ethiopia, now if you look at it at a broad sense, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the people got to go this way. Because if the people went further this way, you'll wind up into the Indian Ocean. So when it says in Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 10, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, it had to be speaking about going west. Shall my daughter, the daughter of my dispersed, even my suppliant, saith the Most High, shall bring his offering. And what that's talking about, how is that going to be done? That's why I went in part 1 to Isaiah chapter 60. It says the ships of Tarshish shall come. And when the ships of Tarshish come, then that will be how Israel will be restored back into their land. The same way we went into captivity in ships over here into this land of Egypt, as Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 speaks of, so will we go back into our homeland by these same people who took us over into captivity. So that already has been prophesied. Okay, so let that be known and understood. Now, like to sit there and go, brothers and sisters, for a recap concerning all of the presentation that has been done. And giving thanks to the Father, the creator of heaven and earth, I thank the people for who sat through this whole presentation for almost about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, or so forth and so on. And as stated, I am open to constructive criticism. What I'm going to do now is show some pictures and explain them for edification purposes. Okay? And what we see right here, once again, is, as it says, brothers and sisters, the world according to the Hebrews. All right? So that way we can gain some type of understanding and know what we're talking about. Then right here we see what is referred to as the Arch of Titus. We went over this as well. This is when the people were besieged in Jerusalem, and they erected this in 80 AD and made basically a commemoration speaking about how they pillaged Jerusalem. Now, when you go in your own time into a book by Time Life, it speaks about how Hadrian made sure the Israelites didn't get back into their own land. This right here we see is the quarter of the American symbol of the eagle. And as we see, United States of America, $quarter. We went over this before in part 3 and 4. And this right here we see is, as stated, the shadow of Egypt. And we have the back of the dollar bill, the obelisk. Then we have here the pyramid and the obelisk that was in Egypt. America, Egypt. So now let's understand this emphatically about something. The Israelites in the ancient world, when you read in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, it distinctly speaks about them saying that Israel will go back into captivity by way of ships or in the land of Egypt. We went over that emphatically in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, also on my YouTube channel, giving thanks to the Father. And so that way it could be known and understood exactly where the Israelite mind was when they said and when they heard Mizraim by Aniyot, the distress of the sea in ships. We were the people that were taken, brothers and sisters, into captivity by way of ships. So that way, once again, we can see and let it be known and understood. Now, one of the other things I wanted to sit there and emphatically point out is that we kept on, as stated before, brothers and sisters, read about wine was used and so forth and so on, and the African chiefs and who sold the people and how did the people become slaves. If you go into a secular book, if you choose to, it is called Stand the Storm, right? Now, in that particular book right there, the author in that book, Stand the Storm, the author being Reynolds, he spoke about how African people did not sell their own people, and that they sold people that they captured in war and that they got from a faraway place that they brought over to the coast, over to be sold to the Europeans, right? So that way, now who were those people that were from a faraway land and from the people that were captured in war were the children of Israel, or the children of Israel, that scattered into Western Africa and unfortunately was later taken on into slavery. Now, why did they go into Western Africa? And then we went over in part 1 and part 2 about them going into Egypt. We read about in the book of Isaiah about Israelites scattering to Sudan and Ethiopia, and cross-referencing with secular history, with them going over into Western Africa, correlating that to the book of Zephaniah chapter 3 verse 10 through 14, so that way we can know and understand emphatically what we were talking about. All right, now, if we will, I like to go back into the scriptures, and we're going to go, brothers and sisters, into the book of Joel, if we will. The book of the prophet Joel, we are going to go and read, and the quote is in chapter 3 verse 1. For behold, in those days, and in that time, when I shall bring back the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations also, and will bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine, that they might drink. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Will you render unto me a recompense? And if you recompense me, surely and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because you have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Greeks, that ye might remove them far from their border. Behold, I will raise them up out of the place where you have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head. So what it's talking about right here, emphatically, it speaks about what? They sold a girl for wine, that they might drink. Now, when you read this right here, it says, yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon? Tyre and Zidon were the people, the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians, the Zidonians, they were part of the Canaanites. The Canaanites were also related, brothers and sisters. When you go into the history of what happened with Carthage, they also went into that land right there too. So you had people that were of the biblical term of the Hamitic nations that did sell people over to who? The Greeks. The Greeks come from who? Javan. Javan is who? The son of Japhet. Javan is the father of Tarshish. Tarshish is Spain. We went over all of that. Who was the one involved first in the slave trade, bringing the house of Israel to the land of Egypt? That is to say, bondage, Western Hemisphere, over here in the Atlantic slave trade? The Spanish. So it's not too hard to figure out emphatically and exactly what's being spoken about. So with that, I say shalom, and may we all learn from this. Most High bless. You can reach me on Facebook at More Yeshaya Yisrael. More, Moreh, Yeshaya, Yeshiah, Yisrael, Yisrael. It's a face shot of me that you see if you care to follow. All right, shalom. Have a good day.